long have I been doing this rant thing? Since what, 2007? And y'all are still watching? Thank you. I've commented at length on the relationship between blacks, Democrats, and the Republican Party. Videos like Begin Deprogramming, where I examine that often asked question, why is it that the majority of the black community consistently votes Democrat? What's funny is that you kind of have to scratch your head and wonder, why is it that the majority of the black community votes Democrat? But back in the day when the majority of the black community voted Republican, it was pretty clear why. Actually, that's not entirely true. If you were wondering why blacks voted for Republicans, it was because you were wondering if they had a death wish. Am I lying? Man, you ain't got to look that far today to see the hostility that'll come your way if you're black and you dare to be a Republican. And just a few decades ago, that hostility came along with lynchings. Now, people have been led to believe that these lynchings were done by a bunch of crazy rednecks running around in white sheets because that's the American way. But y'all, it wasn't the American way. It was the Democrat way. The Ku Klux Klan was the terrorist fraternity founded by the Democrat Party, and their message was simple: vote or die. And when you vote, you make sure it's for Democrats. Now, who is it that was carrying on that vote or die message? Oh yeah, Diddy. Now, do you think that whole vote or die, rock the vote campaign is propaganda for you to vote Republican? No, it's for you to vote Democrat. The Klan wanted white voters to vote Democrat. They didn't want black folks to vote at all. But if black people were going to vote, they wanted them to vote Democrat too. And you can be sure that the Klan has some choice words for black people who voted Republican. Why don't you learn this stuff in public school? Because the public school system is run by the Democrat Party and the unions. But what the scratch and sniff happened, man? The Democrat Party has been the pro-slavery party, the pro-segregation party, the anti-civil rights party, but the majority of the black community votes Democrat. Now, some will say it's because Martin Luther King gave his endorsement to Democrat John F. Kennedy. This supposedly happened after Robert Kennedy made a few phone calls to get Martin Luther King released from jail. But that same Robert Kennedy that made a few phone calls to get Martin Luther King released from jail is the same Robert Kennedy that gave the okie dokie to J. Edgar Hoover to tap Martin Luther King's phone. They wanted to catch Martin Luther King engaging in dialogue that was favorable to communism. They didn't like Martin Luther King. Know why? Because he was a Republican. And actually, man, as far as I know, he never did endorse John F. Kennedy because Martin Luther King was a church pastor who stood by the principle of not endorsing candidates. Martin Luther King offered his thanks to the Kennedys. I don't think he offered an endorsement. But there's Martin Luther King Sr., who was also a Republican. He knew that the Democrats were not friends of the black community, and that included the Kennedys. Why would Martin Luther King endorse John F. Kennedy? Allow me to speculate. Could it be that Martin Luther King Sr. also got a phone call? A phone call that might have gone something like, look here, you want a safe and speedy release of your son from jail? How about a friendly nod for Kennedy in exchange? Not to mention, while John F. Kennedy was a senator, he opposed the civil rights bill that was being advanced by the Republican President Eisenhower. Now, like Republicans, Democrats like the Kennedys back then didn't like communism, and Southern Democrats really hated communism. But let's clear this up though. Hating communism does not make you a capitalist, and it does not make you a conservative. Adolf Hitler hated communism too, but that didn't make him a capitalist or a conservative. I have to point this stuff out because the Democrats know that they're being exposed, so they've been going around and changing some things. So when you go out and research and Google this stuff, you're going to find that the word Democrat is being replaced by the word conservative. Especially when you go research them Southern Democrats, or Dixiecrats as they call them. They're changing the language, y'all. That's how they do. You know, kind of like the term global warming is being replaced by the term climate change. They got their foot ankle deep in their mouth on that one, and they're sore losers about it, man. And sore losers are always trying to change the game. But more and more people are starting to call Democrats out on this stuff. What you mean global warming, man? It's actually been kind of cool. Well, you see, our earth raping is causing our earth mother to be depressed, and her depression is manifesting as changing climates. No, my green friend. The fact that the earth has two poles doesn't make her bipolar per se, like you. Those changes in the climates are called seasons and normal warming and cooling periods. The rest of us know that. Why don't y'all know that? Anyway, the Democrats were seeing that more and more the rest of the country wasn't really riding on the hateful frequency of the Southern Democrats. Now, I reckon the Democrat Harry Truman knew that. He was also a member of the Ku Klux Klan. He just didn't attend their slumber parties. At least that's what he says. But if Truman wanted to be president, he was going to have to show that he was in tune with the rest of the country. He was going to have to show that he was hip, he was cool, you know, denying civil rights to blacks is for squares, man. So he throws down with things like signing an executive order to end segregation in the military and to end discrimination in federal employment. That made him look a little better to the rest of the country, and it made Democrats look a little better to black people. But to his racist homies in the South, he's like, now don't y'all go thinking I'm expecting you to enforce all this civil rights crap. That's where Eisenhower comes in. He's the one who actually put into action what Truman only put on paper. Eisenhower moved to desegregate schools and the military. And if he had any reservations about desegregating schools, it was because he felt it was an issue that needed to be resolved on state levels. But Eisenhower did see that these people were being jerks and that their laws conflicted with the supreme law of the land. That's why there's that instance of Eisenhower sending in military support to make sure that black kids could go to school. Now, Martin Luther King did ask Eisenhower for more help. He wanted Eisenhower to be more verbal against what was happening in the South. But Eisenhower's like, man, I've been expressing my views on this, and to tell you the truth, I really don't know what good another speech for me is going to do for you. And Eisenhower was right, because the speech that was going to be the super rump shaker wasn't meant to come through Eisenhower. It was meant to come through Martin Luther King. So between Truman and the Kennedys, what civil rights meant was votes. It's like Truman set up the ball and the Kennedys spiked it. The Democrat Margaret Sanger already said it. You want to hoodwink them Negroes? You make nice with their ministers. And when Robert Kennedy got Martin Luther King released from jail, it made Democrats look good to the black community. So of course the black community was really disenfranchised. And when Martin Luther King busted on the scene to be the champion of civil rights, he really had the hearts of the black community with him, as well as a lot of other Americans. And when the people saw that their champion was freed from jail by a Democrat, they were so happy that they forgot that it was Democrats who put Martin Luther King in jail in the first place. They forget about Democrats like George Wallace and Democrats like Bull Firehose KKK Connor. There's the pro-segregationist Democrat Ernie Vandiver, the governor of the state that Martin Luther King was jailed in. FDR was instrumental in getting black people to start switching over to Democrat because of entitlements. See, the Democrats have had a system. You got to break the black community down, and every once in a while you got to give them a little something, you know, so they stay tolerant of the place that you've reduced them to. Now, the Democrats knew at some point the black community was going to rise against them. But that's okay, because they had a plan for that, and they still use that plan today. Well, you know, all that awful stuff that's been happening to you, you know, it was those dang Republicans. We've always been with you, brother.
There are a lot of people who wrote these eulogies for Senator Byrd in the newspapers, and I read a bunch of them, and they mentioned that he once had a fleeting association with a Ku Klux Klan. And what does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. He was a country boy from the hills and hollows of West Virginia. He was trying to get elected. And maybe he did something he shouldn't have done, and he spent the rest of his life making it up. And that's what a good person does.
But how did this disenfranchisement come about? Well, let's keep working our way back, and on the way, we'll take a quick look at the presidency of the Democrat Woody Woodrow Wilson. He knew the game. Oh yeah, I'm all about seeing the advancement of you Negro folk. There he was, out there courting the black vote. Woody with a courting, he did ride, Crambone. Oh yeah, y'all black people could vote back then. It's just that Democrats had this really bad habit of coming into power and taking away the rights of black people. Republicans are the ones who would come in and restore the rights. And the last time that happened was when Lyndon B. Johnson was president, a Democrat. But he got that Civil Rights Act passed with Republican support, not so much with Democrat support. Anyway, back to Woodrow Wilson. Now, what did Woodrow Wilson do? He did the same thing that the Democrats of today do. He patronized the black community for their votes. And what did he do with their votes? Well, he did things like segregate the military and fire blacks who had federal positions. And to add insult to injury, he hosted the showing of the pro-KKK movie Birth of a Nation in the White House. Now, even though black people typically voted Republican back then, they got suckered into voting Democrat. Now, before Woodrow Wilson, you had the Republican president Teddy Roosevelt, or he called his party the Bull Moose Party. He was Still a Republican though. Teddy Roosevelt was digging Booker T. Washington, who was also a Republican. Teddy and Booker T kicking it at the White House. Bullet. Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican, invites blacks in. Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, kicks blacks out. Yet black people today say we love them Democrats. Teddy Roosevelt had to work to repair civil rights due to the damage done to it by Southern Democrats. Southern Democrats had become really mad about all these coon-loving Republicans being in the White House for so long. So the Klanocrats were dispatched to turn up the heat on how people were going to vote. So why the loyalty to the Democrat Party? Well, let's keep working our way on back. So let's look at the South wanting to break away from the Union. You got the Southern Democrat representatives that wanted to break away so they could be the slave-holding Confederate states. Oh yeah? Well, how come black men were fighting with Confederates in uniform? Because they had to? They had to be in uniform, y'all, because the Confederate military didn't want to mistake them for runaway slaves with guns and shoot them. They needed every man they could get. It's another example of Democrats using black people when it's convenient for them. So those slaves were forced to fight, and those slaves that were fighting against the Union were hoping to get captured by the Union. Don't get me wrong, you have many of them slaves that were led to believe that the Union was the enemy. Kind of like how it is today. You got many in the black community that are led to believe that the Republicans are the enemy. And I'm sure there were just a lot of slaves out there that were eager to shoot at some white people, huh? Oh, I mean, come on. Now, even today, you have these left-wing cynics that would rather be suspicious of Abraham Lincoln because he said this: "My paramount objective in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could do it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do that also." But there's what he said, and then there's what he did. Now, I could be all hung up on that and bitter about it too, but then I think about what the Democrat General George B. McClellan said. "Our bloody Civil War has now lasted years under the mismanagement of Abraham Lincoln. Nearly 1 million white lives have been sacrificed." So the Democrats of today try to say that Lincoln was indifferent to slavery, but the Democrats of Lincoln's day saw Lincoln as clearly anti-slavery, and they didn't like it. McClellan also charged Lincoln with this: "Lincoln has declared his intention to convert the Civil War into a war for forcible abolition and Negro equality, social and political." This Democrat was a general during Lincoln's administration, and just like pretty much the rest of the Democrats, he was at odds with Lincoln. McClellan ran against Lincoln because he saw Lincoln as a slavery-abolishing Republican who committed the abominable act of sacrificing white lives for black freedom. So what do you want to believe? That Lincoln didn't really care about blacks because of a few lines that he stated? All those people that were killed in the war? That was just a political stunt. He really didn't care about freeing slaves. And forget all that abolitionist-laden Republican platform stuff that Lincoln ran on. Forget all that. And forget about the fact that he signed the 13th Amendment. Man, he the president. He ain't got no business doing that anyway. Now, you can find accounts of Lincoln suggesting that the white race is the superior race, but hey, I never said Lincoln was perfect. But despite such sentiments, he still saw blacks as people. People deserving of the same rights as everybody else outlined in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. But unfortunately, a lot of people would rather assume the worst about Lincoln and side with Democrats. Why? Well, let's keep going on back. Let's examine the paradox of Thomas Jefferson, a Democratic Republican. The Republican side of him knew that we enjoy a constitutional republic. His philosophy on the rights of men and the role of government was brilliant and revered by many people today. That's the Republican side of him. But the Democrat side of him is the side that said, but these rights are good for me, not you, namely you black folks. Matter of fact, let's get to cracking with that fugitive slave law and snatch up a few of those Negroes and put them into slavery. Invasion of the Negro Snatchers. And that's just another example, but people in the black community still side with Democrats. Why? Could it be because the Republican Party stands closest to the Constitution? You know, that document that has that 3/5 clause in it, that clause that supposedly reduces black people to 3/5 of a human being? Many of y'all learned that in our liberal indoctrination system. You know, public school. And this is a prime example of how race-baiting liberals are masters at suckering the black community to keep voting for Democrats. To make the far-reaching accusation that the Constitution refers to black people as 3/5 of a human being and to get people to believe it is like amazing. Hey, let's take a look at how Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution reads. y'all get that black people are 3/5 of a human being out of that? First of all, those who are bound in servitude are still referred to as persons. 2, blacks aren't even mentioned. The only ethnic group mentioned are the Indians. The Indians not taxed 3/5 of all other persons. This clause is reflected in Article 11 in the Articles of Confederation. Now, it is true that the proponents of slavery wanted to be able to count their slaves to be able to gain more representation. And the kind of representation that they wanted was the kind of representation that would keep slavery legal. That's sick, man. Using slaves to gain more slave-supporting representation. Ain't even right. The anti-slavery founders laid down a 3/5 clause to protect the slaves. See, the pro-slavery founders considered slaves property, not people. But they considered them people when it came time to get more representation. And the anti-slavery founders are like, man, you can't be selective about when they're people. So yeah, there were founding fathers that thought that slavery was okay and that blacks were less than human. Those would be your patriarchs of the Democrat Party. And those who opposed slavery were the patriarchs of the Republican Party. So I gotta tell y'all, I really don't see what the 3/5 clause in the Constitution has to do with slaves or persons' worth. But to me, it's making a clear distinction of how Indians will be excluded from being counted. Meaning if they wanted to count an Indian in their state, that Indian had to be taxed at least 3/5 of what everybody else was paying. There had to be some sort of criteria put on the Indians so the pro-slavery folks wouldn't try to count all of them. Anyway, that's my take on it. You can get mad all you want. Now look, y'all, we know that white people have done rotten things to black folks. And not only that, they made it legal to do rotten things to black folks. But check this out. They were Democrats. So how is it today that the majority of the black community are still loyal Democrat voters? Because for the last 50+ years, the Democrats have had control over the entertainment industry, the media, and the educational system. They run the mediums of social engineering. They're really good at poisoning the water, framing somebody else for doing it, and then showing up pretending to be the doctor who can cure what ails you. But of course, there's a lot of stuff to research out there, y'all. These are just the conclusions that I come to when I put my little 2 and 2s together. But you know why I believe what I believe and why I'm a conservative Republican and stuff? Because what I believe doesn't make me angry. I'm a Republican because I dig this republic that protects my freedom to worship God, and I want to keep it that way. Democrats tend to believe what makes them angry, as if negativity is the affirmation of reality. And a big part of why they are Democrats is because they hate Republicans. I can hear the Democrats now, you know, you're not telling the whole story. No, it's y'all who haven't been telling the whole story. Matter of fact, y'all have been telling a story with holes. We've been hearing y'all's side. Now we're telling our side.